a quick run through of what the presentation looks like. So every time that we show up at a school, as Mike was referencing, we load this presentation onto the computers or the school's computer, or I'll bring my own computer just in case they don't have PowerPoint. We always ask that they do have PowerPoint, but sometimes we show up and they don't, or they'll give us a Chromebook or something that doesn't have any apps. So I always just bring my own laptop just to be safe. But we start off by asking the kids as they're taking their seats to test their fentanyl IQ or scan a QR code, which takes them to a short pre-survey before the assembly. And then we ask them to complete that survey. It's paired with a post-survey that they complete at the end of the presentation. And that way we can measure how attitudes change across the presentation, as well as kind of motivation scores or motivations to share what the students learned, which is all really interesting data. And I'll get more into kind of the results of that as we go along, but we've seen really promising results through this model, and it's helped us to drive a lot of impact and make sure that we're having program fidelity across areas and reaching different demographics, different geographical areas with the same type of impact. And we have seen that across the 10 states that we've done these presentations in. So after the kids have taken a survey, this isn't part of the presentation, but just to outline kind of how the presentation flows, we designed the presentation based on this health belief model, which is a model that can be implemented for different prevention efforts, but has been implemented successfully for drug prevention related to the youth population, stating just if you target a kid's perceived severity of a problem or the perceived susceptibility of experiencing the problem themselves, and then raise their self-efficacy or confidence levels to address the problem on their own and give them a cue to action to do so, as well as address, perceived benefits of healthy behaviors and the perceived barriers to them actually accessing those healthy behaviors. Address all that during your programming, then you're going to see an increased likelihood for engaging in healthy behavior change in the youth population, which then drives down negative outcomes. So that's the basis of how the curriculum is kind of laid out and what we address. So this is some of the results across those different tenets that we've measured. We usually see over a 30% reduction in the barriers to accessing or administering naloxone for students. Constructs that we really address through this presentation. We also see between 20 and 25% increases in confidence levels to recognize and be able to respond to a drug overdose appropriately, as well as increased benefits of naloxone use or carrying naloxone in general. And knowledge scores about fentanyl and counterfeit pills are really increased too, because our mission really as a nonprofit is to make sure that no youth are dying from fentanyl or unnecessary overdose deaths in communities across where we're active. So kids also report like a increase in motivation to share what they've learned after the assemblies, and also bring it home and talk, start table discussions around dinner. The presentation is really kind of a starter kit to drive more conversations for the students, but then also give some reflection to the schools on what do we need to change, what do we need to implement here at the school to make sure that we're not having, so that we're prepared for all these circumstances as well, and how can we get the parents this information, and how can we, grow as a community. So we see really positive changes in the community too that we accomplished just by introducing all these concepts and talking points during a school presentation. We get very positive feedback from superintendents saying it's the best presentation they've seen in the 50 years they've been in education. Teachers thanking us, recognizing that kids were really paying attention and they saw tears in the audience. We have students coming up after presentations giving us hugs. A lot of students have been impacted by losing a loved one to fentanyl that administrators know nothing really about, or they're struggling with substance use themselves and they want to get help or want to get help for a loved one. All these things kind of get brought to the surface after an assembly like this. And parents also say that students come home and they start talking about this stuff that they never talk about during dinner and with their friends. So that's all really good. And students, one thing about the high school and middle school populations is that it doesn't matter if you're an influencer or if you're famous. I mean, it does, but as far as receiving their attention during a presentation, what they really reward is vulnerability, and they have a very sensitive BS-ometer, I would say. So if they think that you're just giving them talking points or aren't coming from a real place, then they'll tune out a little bit more. And administrators a lot of times are worried that students are going to be disrespectful during the presentation or not give us their full attention. But students remain locked in from the get-go, especially when we introduce why we're there and who we've lost, and show them the video, which is another attention grabber for the student population. So we start every presentation by asking students how many people they think die in the United States every year from overdose, specifically fentanyl poisoning. And we have this interactive video to show them what the real number is. The number was 279 back in 2022 when we started, and it's come down to 196 Americans losing their lives every year. After we show them, and then we show 196 faces of young people who have lost their lives to fentanyl. So this is a way of just engaging them from the get-go, letting them know the severity of the problem, and relating that to their own high school or middle school population. Like, that would be enough people dying every day to wipe out this whole high school in less than a week. Then we introduce them to our mission, who we are. We're all bereaved family members or people who are passionate about drug prevention in schools, and we want to establish a world where our tragedy doesn't become other people's tragedy. We ultimately do this to save lives, also create more community connection and discussion around substance misuse and the dangers of fentanyl and important resources that people should know about, like where to get naloxone in their community and how to use it. Then we show them a video, Dead on Arrival. This is just one of the scenes from it.
Wheeled away on a stretcher and put into an ambulance.
Are you guys able to hear the audio or no?
Yes.
Alex had no intentions of me seeing him lying on a stainless steel table covered with a sheet with only his head showing. Alex had no intentions of knowing what it felt like to kiss his face for the last time. The images that I'm left with of that day replay in my mind on a regular basis. Please do not put your family through this. And please, 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 I beg of you, learn about fentanyl now. You can be a very important part of saving lives.
So that movie highlights the story of 4 families who have been impacted by fentanyl poisoning or overdose, 2 of which had a history of substance use and 2 of which did not have any history of substance use. So it's a good range of stories. We also have a more diverse version of the video that we show to diverse audiences, which highlights even more stories from one of our partners over at Texas Pictures, who creates a lot of these stories and highlights stories of people who have experienced loss from fentanyl poisoning. Then we give our own testimony following the video. At this point, the kids are silent, completely silent. and I would go in and talk about the story of my brother Drew, or my dad would give the presentation on the story of Drew. Insert, any individual who's lost their lives to drug overdose or fentanyl poisoning, and telling the kids their story. Every story is different. In my brother's story, the points that I really want to drive home, and I know from the get-go, is there was no naloxone available when Drew was found overdosing. He was exhibiting signs of an overdose that his friend didn't recognize when he dropped Drew off at home, and nothing was done to save him, and he died alone. There were signs that he had relapsed, and maybe some support and system issues that led to his unfortunate passing. And first, I always will tell them, who Drew was to me and his whole journey with substances prior to his ultimate fate. But just to humanize, this is a real person who was the number one person in my life, biggest support, and what that leaves families with, a loss like this, and how we don't want Drew's story to be anybody else's story, which is why we tell it in front of student audiences. And a lot of times teachers, educators, administrators will say that we're so brave, but we also have found that this is probably the most healing process for me and my family since Drew's passing. I think we were kind of just walking zombies for the first decade after losing Drew in 2013. And by telling his story, we're not re-eulogizing, his funeral, but we're using his story to hopefully impact other students from realizing that, this could happen to somebody close to me. And Drew didn't seem like the person who would succumb to something like this. So maybe it could happen to anyone else. Just that, it won't happen to me kind of attitude. Hopefully, going away from that, and also opening up more, decreasing the stigma around discussing things like this. It was very lonely for us for a long time after losing Drew, because we didn't know anybody else who had experienced loss similar to ours. Excuse me. And so there's just a lot of healing, I think, too, for the families who participate in speaking. And it's not for everyone. Like some people just need to heal. But I know that the parents that do these presentations ultimately have some sense of, doing something purposeful for others through the passing is a form of healing. So after I would tell Drew's testimony, and we have a suggested way of doing that, kind of a testimonial worksheet that we share with, and I'll get you guys these resources after, along with PDFs of both of these PowerPoints. But it's a structured way of just thinking about what your testimony would look like a roadmap that you can reference when you're telling it on stage. And we found that that's a good outline. There are a couple of different ways that you can do this. We then, after our testimony, introduced students to a young girl named Rain, who lost her life at 19. She was a new bride, living down in Texas, and she was educating her freshman in college classmates about the dangers of fentanyl and controlled substances. And Rain recorded this video for a project on April 27th of 2023. And 1 month later, she passed away from fentanyl poisoning. And So we always tell the kids, Rain knew the dangers, or she knew about fentanyl, but she still succumbed to fentanyl poisoning. So how does that happen to somebody like Rain? Well, Rain was at a pool party. She was offered a Xanax from a friend. It was a Xanax maybe she had taken before for anxiety in her past. And actually, the last search on her phone was, what does a real Xanax look like? And the pill that was in her hand looked identical to the pill that was on the phone. So she took that pill and she ended up dying later that night. So if there's one message that we want to get out to the kids is you can absolutely not trust substances that you get from somebody else, whether that's a family member or a friend, unless it's from a pill bottle that has your name on it and is written by a licensed doctor and dispensed by a pharmacy in the United States. So don't trust anything that you get from an unknown source, essentially. Just why this is the number one problem in America. We're losing over 70,000 people to 71,000 people to a drug overdose in the United States in 2025. In 2024, that number was 80,000. And this really reached a peak in 2022 with 110,000 Americans losing their lives. In comparison to other deaths by category, this is astronomical. More people than died in the 10-year war, the Vietnam War in America, which is why we need to keep talking about it. And no number this high is acceptable. The number needs to be zero. We show kids what that would look like. Stadiums full of people all disappeared in 1 year. We'll show that in different ranging images based on the state that we're presenting in. And then we also say, here are some famous people who have died from fentanyl. Angus Cloud actually famously talked year before he passed about how fentanyl was tainting the drug supply and how dangerous it was. And he ended up dying from fentanyl. A lot of this is laced Percocet, laced cocaine. Prince died from counterfeit pill. And it just shows that even people with prominence who have maybe long-standing and trusted drug plugs where they're getting their sources are dying from this stuff. So if they're being tricked and if it's slipping into their distribution streams too, doesn't matter if you live on Wall Street or if you live under a bridge, like fentanyl is affecting everybody the same. So then I introduced kind of what we're going to cover in the presentation. This segues into more of the education parts that we really want kids to take away from. Raise awareness, obviously, about the dangers and consequences of using illicit substances, as well as introduce them to nasal naloxone. I asked kids who have heard of naloxone versus Narcan. We get hand raises, a way to just get student audience participation during the presentation. And we also want to connect them with, obviously, important community resources. Show them, look at the number and how the number of deaths from overdose, 70% of that, which is driven by fentanyl, in the last several years has just been going up and up and up. The year I lost my brother, it was 33,000 Americans. And like I said, we were reaching a peak back in 2022 when we lost 110,000 Americans to drug overdose death. How it's affecting the adolescent population. We saw the largest increase in the adolescent population over a 2-year period. Those are kids between the ages of 10 and 19. 114% increase in adolescent overdose deaths, largely related to counterfeit pills, and about 2/3 of them dying at home with a parent or a loved one in the next room. So a lot of times there's no suspicion that there's any drug use going on when these children are dying from overdose deaths. And the majority of them have no history of opioid use, yet 90% of them are dying from opioid-related overdose deaths. So that tells us that a lot of these kids are using for the first time or have never taken an opioid and are trying to take something else, and then they're getting tricked or poisoned by fentanyl. So then we introduced them to counterfeit pills these pills are essentially being marketed the same as real pharmaceutical pills that are found in the United States, and some people may be prescribed, but kids and adults alike are turning to online sources through social media. No longer need to go to the dark web, no longer need to know a person to come in contact with this stuff. It's easy, it's accessible, and we're all connected through smartphones. So kids can literally search for emojis on Snapchat or something and see who's promoting or advertising that they're selling pills online. Reach out to that person one time and then get one of these pills that's often being laced with either fentanyl or methamphetamine. 29% of the pills last year that were being seized and tested by the DEA that contained fentanyl contained a potentially lethal dose. And a lethal dose fits on the tip of a pencil. Only takes 2 milligrams to kill you. By comparison, it's about 2,000 milligrams in a sugar packet and a little table sugar that you see at restaurants. And these are the examples of counterfeit pills, versus authentic pills. They look pretty identical. The drug networks that are making this stuff and selling it are using the same pill dyes and pill presses that real pharmaceutical companies use. So there's no way to visually tell what's real and what's fake. There are some differences in the examples, especially the Xanax in the middle, which will ask kids, what are some differences that you notice? Another opportunity for audience participation. The color is different, the markings are different, but even these things can be explained away by somebody trying to sell you a pill, like the pharmaceutical manufacturer changed, or this is the generic version, or I could only get the yellow ones this time. If kids don't know that this stuff is being baked and sold so readily and so abundantly, then it's easy to see how they could be tricked into taking one of these pills. It's not only being put into pills, but fentanyl is also being added to cocaine, heroin, methamphetamine, and other illicit drug supplies. It's 50 times more potent than heroin and 100 times more potent than morphine. So 50 to 100 times stronger than any other substance out there. Then we teach them about what an opioid overdose is. We have these receptors in our brain, which opioids bind to, and they initially will block the receptor from pain from the brain to the site of injury. After surgery, if you're given a Percocet or you break a bone, those opioids are going to bind, and then they're going to block the pain signals from the brain to the broken bone. But when they're flooded with opioids, then it's also going to shut down the body's ability to breathe. So that's what causes an overdose. Is it often looks like an asphyxiation or a drowning because the person doesn't get enough oxygen because their lungs just aren't working or their diaphragms aren't lowering to allow oxygen into the lungs. We introduce them to naloxone or Narcan. It works on any opioid class, from heroin to fentanyl to any of the opioid classes in between. And how it works is it actually has a stronger attraction to those opioid receptors in our brain. So when the brain sees the naloxone floating around in the presynapses, they'll release the opioids and grab onto the naloxone, creating a protective barrier to allow those signals for breath to resume. Its sole purpose is to reverse the effects of an opioid overdose. And the target goal of this medication is just to allow the person to start breathing again. Simple as that. It only lasts for about 30 to 90 minutes, which is important to note because a lot of opioids last much, much longer. So when you give this medication, it's always important to have more of it on the way, or that person is monitored by health professionals. So always call 911 when you give this medication. It's going to reverse that respiratory depression we talked about. It can cause sudden withdrawal, which can be unpleasant. It's non-addictive. You can't overdose on naloxone, and there's not going to be any effect on the person if an opioid's not present. It doesn't work on alcohol, doesn't work on benzos, but it will potentially save a person's life if you suspect that they are overdosing. So it's important to know what to recognize for when a person's overdosing. And it's routinely used by EMS and first responders. So it is safe to use in communities. So then we talk about signs of opioid use versus overdose. In opioid use, you're going to see pinpoint pupils, muscles may be slack or droopy, they may be nodding out or falling asleep. but they'll be out of it, but they're still going to respond when you call their name, shake their shoulder. They'll be responsive. Some of these can be explained away by maybe someone's drowsy or out of it because they're tired. But one of the hallmark signs of opioid use is the pinpoint pupils. So it's normal for our pupils to react to light. When we go into the bright outdoors, pupils are going to get small to protect the back of the eye from too much light exposure. When we go into a dark lit movie theater, our pupils are going to dilate so that we can see what's up on screen and allow more light to hit the back of the eye. But when we're on an opioid, the pupils are going to get small and stay very, very teeny tiny. So you only really see the color of the person's eye or the iris. And that doesn't change based on light exposure. So they're going to stay small no matter what the light exposure. And that's how you know an opioid's probably on board. So in overdose, now the person is not responding. When we're calling their name, shaking their shoulder, they're non-responsive. Their breathing is slow or shallow. Because of the lack of oxygen in their body, they're going to see skin discoloration. So in lighter skin folks, that's going to be blue or purple tints to their fingernails and lips that you'll notice first. In darker skin folks, that's going to be a gray or ashen appearance. Their face may be very pale or clammy. And covered all those. Oh, you may notice choking or gurgling sounds from the individual too, which is just the body's reflex of, I'm not getting enough oxygen, I need more oxygen. But the person's not actually breathing when you hear those sounds. So if you see any of these signs, you should immediately respond and think this is an opioid overdose. So then we teach them there are 5 steps to save a life. First step, you're going to shake and shout their name, shake their shoulder. Hey, are you okay? If the person is not responding, then we're going to call 911. And we tell the kids there are a few reasons for that, because 911, that dispatcher is going to be able to walk you through other life-saving measures you can take to save that person's life, like CPR, rescue breathing, things if you don't have naloxone on site. They're also going to get more of that naloxone on the way, because naloxone only has that 30 to 90 minute half-life versus EMS response times are generally around 10 minutes. So first responders all carry naloxone, so you always want to call 911 to get that on site as fast as possible. Another reason for calling 911, we introduce them to the Good Samaritan Law, which is a legal protection here in the state of Michigan that states that if I'm using illegal substances with somebody and I'm doing everything in my power to help save that person's life that I think may have been overdosing, I will not be prosecuted or held criminally responsible for any drugs on my person in the area or in my system when the time first responders, oftentimes police, arrive on scene. The police officers will confiscate the drugs and get rid of them, but they will not hold me criminally responsible. So this is a barrier removed from calling 911. So we want kids to always, if you suspect somebody may be overdosing, always call 911. You won't get in trouble. It also protects you from civil liability for any damage that may have been done doing chest compressions, if you broke a rib or injured the person in some way when you were trying to help save their life. So important for kids to know, remove that barrier. This also applies for alcohol and marijuana in the state. So if you're at a party and those substances are on scene, there's still going to be that protection for both you and the victim. This is also for kids at home with parents who may be using substances that they don't want to get their parents in trouble or taken away. It's just another measure to help save lives. So next, we teach them how to use nasal naloxone. Comes in a blister pack like this, and we just peel off the back. Careful not to push the plunger on the bottom. Push the applicator into the person's nose, and then push the plunger on the bottom with our thumb. It releases the full medication all at once. There's no need to prep it or prime it. It's ready to go as soon as it's out of the box.
Also, I release a whole real one so they can see the plume of fentanyl, indicating that there's no contraindications, and it's a visual stimulation for the audience to see that.
Yeah. And then after we've given our first dose, we're going to check for breathing, because that's our ultimate goal, to get the person breathing again. If they are breathing, then we just wait with them until first responders arrive. But if they're still not breathing, then that dispatcher on the phone is going to be able to walk us through CPR or rescue breathing for that individual. If after 2 minutes the person is still not breathing, we will dispense a second dose into the opposite nostril, same way we did the first time, but just in case there was a blockage or obstruction the first time that you give the dose. EMS is responding that there's often 2 to 4 doses needed in the field for a person to be reversed, especially with the potency of the fentanyl and carfentanil and other derivatives that are being added to the drug supply and the overdoses that they're seeing. So you cannot overdose on naloxone. You can give this as many times as you want in 2-minute intervals until the person starts breathing again or until EMS arrive on scene. And then when the person does start breathing, we just place them on their left-hand side to prevent them from vomiting into their airway, just in case there's aspiration or anything like that, because it can cause a sudden withdrawal. Vomiting is associated with that. But then just let them know they've had a medical event. You gave them some medication and help is on the way. And give them space because you don't know how they're going to respond. Then we always cover community resources. We want kids to know where naloxone is. We also want the schools to know where Narcan or naloxone is in their communities. In Michigan, we have these porch boxes or Save a Life stations with free naloxone. You don't need to provide your name or sign a form or anything like that. You can just take as many doses as you want for home, for your purse, for your car, medicine cabinet. And then these are replenished on a weekly basis by organizations that we partner with. We created a website called narcannow.us where you can find free naloxone, especially in the states that we are active in. We try and make this resource available so people can just look up where Narcan is available in their community. And we also highlight local coalitions that are already working with the school or provide resources like this and trainings for school staff, so that the school is aware of them and hopefully connect with them and get connected with resources like that. Then we always introduce, Victoria Voice Diary. Thanks to Now I Know, Mike Day's help with our partners over at Victoria Voice have been amazing. It's one of the reasons why we can keep doing this work like we're doing. But Victoria Siegel was a young girl who was struggling with substances and mental health during high school and middle school. She didn't share it with anybody. Her parents didn't really know the struggles that she was going through, but she wrote about it all in a diary. And that diary is written in her own handwriting and was published by her parents with her consent. She said, if anything ever happened to me, please publish this diary. And it's paired with a lot of great prevention resources at the end. We always offer 2 to 3 boxes of books, which 32 books in a box, to schools that we go to. And the school administrators or the social work or counselor's office can distribute that to the students. If they need an opt-in form or parent consent form signed, then they can kind of deal with that on their end. But we always provide these as a free resource at the end and as a follow-up to the presentation. We'll let schools know that too during the booking process, that this is available as a resource, as well as Fentanyl Fake and Fatal curriculum, which is a 9-lesson plan curriculum that's available for classroom implementation in schools. Good for healthcare curriculum or health class curriculum or as a remedial program. We also started students advocating fentanyl education with some students down in Miami the first year that we were active. And this is just a way for kids to connect with kids about the dangers of fentanyl, maybe inform other kids about where naloxone is available in their community, and keep the conversation going in the school by creating this chapter. It's good on college applications. It's good to start and give back to your community. So we try and encourage that at all of our presentations as well.
Your reason for joining SAFE may be sitting next.
As a free resource, we also make available this 1001 Great Comebacks to Peer Pressure. It was started by my brother and my father back before my brother had passed away, and my dad finished this book with some of the students at SAFE. Those SAFE chapters down in Miami helped with creating some of the comebacks for different peer pressure situations on how they could say no to drugs and stop other kids from robbing their futures. So it's a free resource available on our website at fentanylfathers.org, right at the bottom as a downloadable PDF. We finish every presentation by saying this together with the kids. The I'll never try, so I'll never die from fentanyl, and ask them to complete the post survey. This presentation, so that's the end of the presentation that we show to students. We cover all of those constructs that we like to, measure to see the effectiveness or attitude changes among the students. And this is just one of the hurdles that we have to overcome on the front end with some schools. A lot of schools are put off by drug prevention presentations that maybe in the past have been done by law enforcement, where they just use scare tactics to scare students into not using drugs. But scare tactics really hasn't been shown as a proven model. It actually had a reversal effect with the DARE program in more adolescent drug use. So what we do here is not, use scare tactics, but storytelling. We tell our real life story for a bunch of different reasons, but one of the reasons being, this is true, this happened to me. It takes away that it won't happen to me kind of attitude and creates some empathy around the subject matter. Also builds trust with the student body, and it's supported as an evidence base for combining with the education that we try and provide to the students so that it sinks in better. So this is like an ideal combo for substance use prevention in schools. Again, scare tactics not being storytelling, or they're not the same thing. Fentanyl, Fake and Fatal, like I said, is the 9-lesson plan curriculum that we provide to schools. I send out a Google Drive link. We have a quick teacher quick start guide on how to implement it in classrooms. So we tell schools when we're doing outreach, you're not just bringing us in for a one and done assembly. We want to provide this presentation to the schools every year if we can, to different student bodies or to all the student bodies, but we also provide these leave behinds, which are meant to keep the conversation going. This curriculum also goes over positive coping mechanisms that kids can implement. It dives more into detail on a lot of the subjects that are covered during the presentation. So it's just another resource we provide to schools. This is the recommended outline for the testimonies that we share with parents. Kind of what happened, or what were your loved one like, what happened, to look back, and then what is our ask. So I used my brother's story as an example of my ask being, I wish that naloxone was available on site. I wish that Drew's friend had known the dangers of, or the signs and symptoms of an overdose, so that he would have responded better. But hopefully now that the students are left with that, they can respond better. Successes and pitfalls. This goes more into like the setup, just having the presentation on a USB, getting to the presentation early, which Mike a lot of times, he covered all of that in the presentation already. Also, I already touched on audience rewards, authenticity, and vulnerability more than anything at these ages. So having that come across is really easy by just telling your own testimony. Doesn't have to be sugar-coated, doesn't have to be perfect, just has to be real, is what we found. And we've had lots of different presenters with no speaking background at all do this presentation with us, and it comes across great. So next, open it up to questions on that. I know it was fast, but I wanted to...
Just on the top. Oh, here's a question. Look, can you read that, Jack? Gary's putting a question up there. Oh. I can't exactly see it because it's blurry.
I'm going to close out of this screen so that I can just go back to the chat here and see. Okay. Mike, I got your email there. Christian radio stations.
I'm going to end this video portion. I would just say, Gary and any speaker, potential speaker listening, Mike, others, that the story is riveting alone without any, motivational anything. When we start out a presentation, we say, "Hey kids, I'm here on a sad mission. I lost my son to this." They go dead silent. And then you can see that some of our video effects really hold them. We do an educational piece, but then we give our personal testimony about the story, and it blows the rooms away. We've never, ever, ever had kids not pay full attention. And principals, if anything, apologize for any resistance they gave getting into the schools. So these things work. We just want to be able to hit every school in the country. We will answer questions off of this video. This was a 40-minute video on the presentation. I'm going to end it right here. Thanks, Jack. If you want any questions, email Jack Swan at fentanylfathers.org. You can email me, Greg, at angelarmy.com. Thank you.